It surrounds us. It's everywhere. Tonight, you will hear from the people who live and work within these highly active locations, all in the efforts to discover America's most haunted. With your host, ghost hunter and author, Dan Terry.
Good evening, guys and ghouls. I am Dan Terry, your ghost host with the most haunted. And hey, happy 4th of July. It's here. My second favorite holiday next to Halloween. And you know what they say, when it's July, it's almost August. When it's almost August, we're bumping into September. And after September, we got to get the Halloween stuff up. So we might as well start now, right? All right. My guest, and I've been holding this one for a while now. Jeff Santos runs Yorktown Ghost Walk. And Yorktown, you guys probably know, but in case you don't, that was really, to me, the birthplace of the United States. Yorktown is where the final battle of the Revolutionary War happened. So this is the last fight. The British gave up, surrendered. We got Cornwallis almost marched into the sea. The French were holding back the British Navy from rescuing them. We had cut off their supply lines on the York River. This was the end of the Revolutionary War for all intents and purposes. So Yorktown has got a special place in American history. But not only that, it was under siege by the British, by the United States in the Civil War, because in the Civil War, the Union had it under siege. There was a house there that the owner of the house actually called in a artillery strike because they thought the other general was in it on his own house. It's so much interesting history, and nobody knows it better than my guest. So let's bring up Jeff Santos. There we are, Jeff. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
All right. Doing really good and really excited to talk to you because, like I said, July 4th is really the birth of the United States, but Yorktown has to be its first breath because that's where we actually have full independence. So you know the ghosts there. Let's talk about it. What do you want to talk about on the town, some of the history of it?
Yeah, well, it's a cool story. I mean, we had the British that came up from North Carolina under Cornwallis, and they're held up there in Yorktown. And meanwhile, General Washington and his army, they're all the way up in New York, and he's engaging General Clinton and the British army up that way. So they come up with this plan where the French Navy is coming up the coast, and they're saying, what do you want them to do? So they blockade the bay there. They blockade the York River, cut off the British ships that are there, keep them from escaping, keep any more from coming in for backup. Washington, he builds a camp up there in New York and makes it look like he's going to stay up there for the long run. He makes it look like he's going to settle in up there. He even writes up false battle plans, and these plans purposely fall into the British hands, making them think that, yeah, Washington's staying up there in New York. So he leaves a good portion of his army up there to man those camps, and in the dark of night, he takes a portion of his army, and along with the French under the Marquis de Lafayette, and they slip down to Yorktown and stop off at Williamsburg first, and then come up to Yorktown, and the siege begins. And this was where we'll see Hamilton in action as he engages the redoubt and has some battle action there, and they eventually, within a matter of weeks, Cornwallis surrendered to Washington. We're not too far from the anniversary of that. It was October 19th, 1781. So this was the last major battle of the Revolutionary War. This is when the king threw his hands up and said, we've had it. You know, we don't know. There's nothing else we can do. That's it.
We can't afford it. You cannot afford to keep fighting. And just so I can give the French their fair credit, which I seldom do, but they were violating orders to stay because the war was so close to being over. If they'd have left as they were ordered to do and returned to France, he could have escaped, went back up north, and started all over again.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the French played an integral part there, and they brought up the flank, and the Continental Army hit the point of honor, and yeah, they came in, and it was Lafayette that had asked. You mentioned about the general that told him to engage his own house.
Yeah,
this guy was quite a character, and we don't hear about him enough in the history books. It was General Thomas Nelson Jr. And this guy was a wealthy man at the start of the war. He owned a shop there in Yorktown, operated a tavern, had a warehouse, had several mercantile vessels. I mean, this guy was like the Donald Trump of his day, per se, right? And when the war came about, he said, I believe in independence so much that he handed over everything, all of his money, every dime that he had, all of his ships, to support that war for independence. He became the general of the Virginia militia. And then he borrowed money from all the plantation owners, all of his prominent friends, as much money as they would loan him so that he could fund the Virginia militia.
Mm-hmm.
So he's standing right there next to Lafayette. It's the third day of the siege, and they're on a hill. They're looking over Yorktown. And Lafayette asks him, he says, my lord, to which direction should I aim my cannons? And Nelson tells him, he says, aim them at my house, because there's a chance that Cornwallis might find it desirable for headquarters. So here's this guy, and it's hard for us to imagine. I mean, this is a rich guy, was a rich guy who, for the first time in his life, is in debt, knows what that feels like to have nothing. The last thing he has in his possession is this house, which was built by his grandfather in 1720. To give you an idea, it's the most prominent home in all of Yorktown. It's a beautiful house, and now he's aiming the cannons at it, and the chance that it'll end this war and win independence. So, quite a guy.
That house still has cannonballs in it, right? Where
it does.
They hit it, yeah.
Yep, it still has cannonballs in it from that day of the siege.
And that is on your tour. So anyone on the tour sees the house, the cannonballs, gets the whole story of it. And while we're there, there's some ghost stories attached to that house. Could you tell us one or two?
There are, absolutely. Yeah. So according to legend, when that siege was underway, there was a British soldier that ran into a secret garret, which is, you have those old staircases that go up and little doors, the panels that open up and you can go under them. People would use it for storage and stuff. So he runs into that garret under the stairs, and a cannonball came right through the staircase and killed him. So ever since then, that door would open up on its own. The door to that secret garret would open up on its own, and they attributed that to the ghost of the British soldier. Uh-huh. But the house also has history going up into the Civil War. They used it as a hospital during the Civil War, both sides, first the Confederate, then the Union side. And there's still bloodstains on the floor from when it was used as a hospital. And there's a Confederate soldier that seems to lurk in the attic. And what was cool is I talked to this guy probably since the last time I talked to you. Mm-hmm. And he grew up in Yorktown in the 80s when there were still some more houses down there, modern houses and such. And his bus stop used to be there out in front of the Nelson house. And he said that kids got too afraid they had to move the bus stop because they kept seeing this guy with a beard looking out of the attic window. It wasn't me. But they believed it was a Confederate soldier, so they ended up having to move these kids' bus stops. And several people throughout the years have reported seeing this guy just looking out the attic window. So one lady even encountered him on a tour.
Yeah, you told me about that. She had broke away from the tour, and I don't think he liked it very much, right?
No, yeah, she broke away from the tour, and she happens upstairs, and this guy comes walking towards her, and she thinks, well, this is weird because it's a Confederate soldier, and you don't see Civil War reenactors down here. It's always Revolutionary War, and this guy comes walking in front of the window, and the sunlight shines right through him. So she realizes that he's not a real person.
Wow. There was a big statue we went to, and I'd seen it before because for a while I was stationed at a Coast Guard base there in Yorktown, so I'd go through the battleground into town. But there's a beautiful statue right in the middle of in the battleground that you can even see from the ocean, or at least from the bay. And it's been like struck by lightning 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. yeah, absolutely. That's the Victory Monument.
Yeah.
And they built that to commemorate the victory. And it took them 100 years before they started. So they have this huge celebration in 1881. And there's 13 Masons there to lay the cornerstone, and one from each of the 13 colonies.
Oh, wow.
The president is there, foreign dignitaries. Like, there's pictures of it from that celebration, and that whole area is just packed with people. But they built this monument, and it didn't have a lightning rod. So amazing that it went from 1881 all the way up until World War II before it was struck by lightning.
Mm-hmm.
And when she was, the statue on top, Lady Victory, Lady Liberty, she had two different names. The head was knocked off. And the belief back then was that this, and I guess we've kind of got away from that, but the belief back then was that this statue represented our nation's victory. So if something happened to that statue, it was damaged, it meant a bad outcome. So when people saw this damage, they believed that it was the war wasn't going to end well. It was a bad omen.
I'm glad they were wrong.
Yeah,
that was a nasty one. But did it get hit another time and damaged?
Yeah, it got hit during Desert Storm and damaged. And once again, during Desert Storm, they looked at that as a bad omen. They thought it was going to be a bad outcome for the war.
I don't know. It almost sounds like that means a positive outcome, because we didn't do as well in Korea or Vietnam as we did in World War II and that one. That's
true. So, and those two, it didn't get damaged. But yeah, she's got a lightning rod now, so no more bad omens.
Tell me about the spirits on the battlefield. You've mentioned they've been seen.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's been so there's a lot of battlefields that surround Yorktown. I mean, the town itself was a battlefield. One of them is Surrender Field, and there's been usually right around sunset. People have seen bright flashes of light about that field, very almost like. And I have a picture of one. I wish I'd sent it to you. It's just like this flame in the middle of the battlefield. And some people have said it looks like the cannonballs that would have had the fuses on them. Something like that, just kind of flying through the air. It's weird. Flashes from the end of muskets. So that one has a lot of that. But it also has George Washington's, and I haven't told this story on the tour, so it's been since I wrote the book that I thought about this one. But I believe it was George Washington's stepson. And his stepson, he wanted to please him, and he joined the army. Allegedly wasn't much of a fighter or something like that, but he took ill in Washington's camp, and he ended up dying in bed. And they'll see his ghost running around the battlefield in his nightshirt.
Wow, that's a new one.
Yeah. And they say, and I've never tried this, but they say if you park in Surrender Field in the parking lot and you sit there and listen at night, you'll hear the British fifes and drums playing the song "The World Turned Upside Down," not like the hip hop type like Hamilton version, but like the original version.
There was, and I did not know this till I took your tour, and I'm telling you, friends, this tour has all kinds of history. There was actually a revolution prior to 1776, and it kind of started in that area. Can you give us a little idea of that story again?
Yeah, absolutely. That was Bacon's Rebellion, I believe you're talking about. Bacon's Rebellion. So there was a corrupt governor, and he was involved in some illegal trade and such, when the capital was still in Jamestown. So Bacon raised up this army and went against this governor. There was also battles with the Indians, and that was controversial because people said that that Bacon had attacked these Indians and just slaughtered them for no reason. But the story, from what I found in the history behind it, was that the governor was involved in some illegal trade with these Indians. So he was not offering protection to the people against the warring tribes. He wasn't offering protection to the the town. So the Indians were able to attack and get away with it and have no protection. So Bacon's rebellion, he rose up against the governor, rose up against the Indians that were attacking them and retaliated. And he made it pretty far. Now, he died of dysentery at a man's plantation in Gloucester, which is right across the river from Yorktown. This man was Thomas Pate. He died at Thomas Pate's plantation. Thomas Pate was a major in Bacon's rebellion. And around 1694, he comes to Yorktown. And he establishes a ferry service, opens up a tavern, and he builds one of the oldest houses that's still standing. In 1699, he builds this house, which was originally called the Thomas Pate House. Now it's called the Cole Diggs House because Cole Diggs was another prominent citizen, big in the tobacco industry, politician. He lived there at one point, and they changed the name, and now it's named the Cole Diggs House. But it serves as a coffee shop now, and it's a pretty cool little place. You can go in there and have some coffee. They used to at least have wine. You could go in there and drink wine and stuff like that. But it's pretty neat. The Pate family, they would keep a detailed genealogy, and they would meet at this house all the way up until at least the early 2000s from the last article I read and last thing I found. I don't know if they still do, but yeah, they would meet there upstairs and they'd go over the genealogy, and amazing place. But what was cool about that one is I talked to a lady. I got an email from a lady, might have been since you and I talked. I don't know, but she was upstairs there having some coffee with her son, and she was talking about the wedding. She brought up her son's wedding, and the candle on the table lit right in front of them.
Lit.
And she was like, wow, yeah, just a candle lit up. She's like, wow, what would do that? And my first thought was this woman named Joan Lawson. And what's cool about her is she was allegedly Thomas Pate's mistress. So when Thomas Pate passed away, instead of leaving the house to his estranged wife, he left it to the mistress, Joan Lawson. And she's made appearances there all throughout the years. And she always seems like she's taking care of the place, tending to something, tending to the fireplace. You know, hey, maybe she came up and lit this candle. I don't know. Even when the house was vacant, there was a lady that was a group that was there doing some renovations. And the lady had happened downstairs and saw this woman. Looked like she just stepped right out of history, you know, and yeah, pretty cool. So it's interesting to think that this lady's still there, taking care of that house, and how we tied that into Bacon's rebellion.
So there was a lot of traumatic stuff went on in that tiny little town of Yorktown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that a seaport?
It was, well, the York River. It's a deep channel. Yeah, that was one of the main ports. Like you'll see Navy ships come down there. So people don't realize the extent of it when you look at it today, because now it's a beach. And there's people just chilling on the beach and eating at the restaurants. And it's hard to imagine you're out there swimming in that river, and there's at least 27 ships that are underneath you there that are sunk. Thousands of British soldiers that I've been told are at rest down there in the bottom of the ocean, or not the ocean, the river. But yeah, this was one of the main ports. The waterfront back then, it was all wharfs and warehouses, and there were constantly ships coming and going, and tobacco was being exported, and you know, everything, including slaves, were being imported. 30,000 slaves were brought in through Yorktown. So it's an extensive port. Now, what put an end to it was this great fire that happened in 1814. And this was kind of interesting because we're just past the War of 1812, which a lot of people don't pay attention to. You know, this is the second time the British came and tried to take over. But thanks to Andrew Jackson and a couple of other cool people, we were able to, you know, run them off. But there were some British soldiers that were seen throughout Yorktown just before this fire burst out. And no one knows how it started. They kind of, there's a theory that these British soldiers set fire to the town. Okay. We know it started at this ordinary, Gibson's ordinary, and it it burned down everything. It burned down, swept down, burned down all of the wharfs and warehouses. The waterfront, the port was just devastated. A lot of the colonial buildings were done. The town just died after that. It was never a port town again after that. But yeah, prior to 1814, from 1691 all the way up, it was going. It was established by the Act of Port, so they were selling out those tracts of land along the waterfront to businesses, giving them a certain amount of time to build there because they wanted to get that thing going. And it sure enough, it was.
And there's a large field that is haunted, kind of overlooking the port that you was talking about.
Yeah. So that field, there was a house that stood there, and this was the house of William Nelson, who was, I mentioned Thomas Nelson Jr. earlier. This was his father. Okay, his father was William Nelson, and it's confusing because he's named Thomas Nelson Jr., but his father's William Nelson. Well, Thomas Nelson is named after his uncle. So William Nelson, he didn't live to see the war start, but his house was still standing, and it was this beautiful mansion that it was a perfect place for some British officers to come in and stay. And legend has it that one moonless night, it was pitch black. General Washington, he's taking advantage of this cover and getting his cannons into position. So he lights the first fuse on the first cannon to fire on Yorktown, and that cannonball goes right through this house and decapitates one of these British soldiers. Then these guys scurried and ran out and were met with this rain of artillery fire, and the house was almost demolished, and most of them were killed right there. And it's interesting because that field is one of those places where sometimes you feel perfectly comfortable, but other times there's like a shift in the energy and you just feel compelled to leave, to get out of there. And it's hard to explain, you go back towards the back, it should be a peaceful little area where there's some benches and you can look out over the water, and then you just feel like I got to get out of here for some reason. There was a couple of people on the tour that were interesting, and one of them, I had told the story. The legend has it that there's a headless man that still wanders around that field, the headless soldier. And this lady was shocked when I told that story, and I'd never really seen, that was the one story that never really seemed to freak anybody out, just like, oh yeah, it's a legend, headless guy. But this lady, her face turned pale white, and she said that she was down there, and she said, mind you, I'm not from this area, I've never heard any of these stories, and my son is with me, 3 years old, and she stops to take some pictures across the street, and he starts looking out towards the field and goes into hysterics, and he's scared to death of something. Well, she gets him calmed down, and it turns out that he starts going on about this headless man that he saw in the field. So it's interesting because children are believed to be more sensitive to this sort of thing. Sure. And here you have this kid that's not from this area, never heard the story. I mean, his mom's going to know if he's making something up, and he's seeing this headless guy out in this field where that's the story. And there was another one. Oh, it was creepy that it was around Halloween, and I think there's more activity there around Halloween, not just because I don't think it has to do with Halloween as much as it has to do with it's the anniversary of the siege. It's the anniversary of the surrender. Right. So we get big groups around that time, and there was we were at the next stop, and people were taking some pictures of the cannonballs on the side of the house. And this lady came up to me and she said, we got to leave. My daughter saw something nasty in that field. And I'm thinking she saw like a dead rabbit or something like that, but sure. The little girl, very properly dressed and straight faced, she came up to me and she said, the ones in the field aren't like the ones that are around us now. And that scared me. I almost dropped the lantern and took off running because that reminded me of something from like The Shining or something like that, But I didn't really almost drop the lantern, but I thought about it.
The little girl was seeing both the bodies and the spirits.
Yeah. She didn't go into detail, but when she said she saw something nasty, it was the spirits that she was seeing that was nasty in the field. And I didn't pry too much. You know, the mother told me she was sensitive and that she can see things, and you know, that's all they told me. So they didn't go into detail, but I gather she must have seen, you know, she definitely saw something nasty spiritual wise, not like dead rabbit wise.
Right. Well, you got to wonder if the spirits look.
She didn't go into detail.
The spirits may look to her like bloodied and battered and messed up.
Yeah, mangled, and yeah, I could imagine. I mean, because that was quite an attack there. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So much history and so much hauntings there. You feel like discussing a little bit about the city hall or the big building. I guess it's still a city hall, isn't it?
Your call. Yeah. So that one, that used to be the courthouse, and it's now they built a different courthouse, but the courthouse has always stood there since like 1697 when the first one was built, and 5 different courthouses. So the first one was too small. So around 1730, they tore that down, built a bigger one. The 1730 courthouse, I'd have to go back and remember all of them, but each courthouse met demise in a one way or another. Usually fire. Most of them were fire. The 1730 courthouse that burned down in the fire of 1814. The one after that blew up when the Union stored their gunpowder there. The one after that caught fire. And then I think the one after that is the current one we're on, if I counted right. So quite a few different courthouses there. But the interesting thing is that the one that was there during the Revolutionary War, it would have looked like what's there now, because they basically built a replica of that on the same footprint and stuff. And that courthouse, it was used as a hospital for some time after the war for French soldiers. The French used it for their war-torn troops and such. And it got to the point where, you know, of course they have a lot of crude methods back then and such, but
yes,
the stench was awful. According to the locals, you know, people wouldn't even go into that area. But a lot of death that occurred there. And what's interesting is it still seems to harbor those same spirits. It still seems to harbor the spirits, even though we're on the 5th courthouse now, and that was the second one. It still seems to people running around, smells, odors, moans and groans like people in pain. It almost seems like it's still walking back into that hospital. And there's a lot of cases like that. Like as a paranormal investigator, I'll get calls from people that moved into brand new houses and their house is haunted, and they don't know why. You know, they say, well, no one's ever lived here except for me. No one's died here. But oftentimes these spirits are drawn to the land. You know, something happens on that land and those spirits stay right there. I've even seen cases where people have seen spirits walking up. Looks like they're walking through the air, but at one point in time there was a staircase there. You know, so with this being a replica of that courthouse and such, it makes sense that they would even still be haunting it. You know,
there is so much that goes on in Yorktown, and we think of the glory of Yorktown and all the military victories, the military things that's gone on. And yet people, I guess, don't think about the amputations of the poor soldiers who were wounded, the bloody deaths, the terror of the folks that lived there. It had to be rough on these folks.
Well, I can't imagine. Yeah. And you think, so we have not only during the Revolutionary War, but during the Civil War, most of those buildings, a lot of them, if they weren't barracks for soldiers, they were used as hospitals, and casualties were brought in from some of the surrounding battlefields. So a lot of death that occurred there. And meanwhile, you have the people in the town that had to be experiencing this, because a lot of them left. Especially during the Revolutionary War. But then there's also reports of the townspeople taking cover below the bluffs. There's a cave down there known as Cornwallis Cave. And it's called that because they said Cornwallis hid out in there, but there's controversy there. But there were a bunch of these caves, allegedly, that used to be along the waterfront. And the townspeople there's stories of them taking cover, taking shelter in these caves as the town's being bombarded, as the town's under siege during the war. And to imagine that, like, you're just a normal person, running your shop or going about your business, and now you find yourself on a battlefield. It had to leave quite an imprint. And they will say about that cave and about down below the bluffs there that people have heard women crying and people weeping. And it sounds like it's almost like stepping back and you're hearing these townspeople as they're enduring that siege,
God, it must have been horrible, and I'm sure it was traumatic enough to have left an imprint on the town, on the area. So
absolutely,
that's what keeps you ghost hunting out there, I guess.
That's right. And what's cool about it is Yorktown. It's the town itself. It's not one of those towns that's just a museum. Just the next street over, and even on the main street, there's local residents living there that walk their dogs. There's shop owners there. There's people that are there all the time and taking evening walks and, out in their yard doing yard work and everything else. So you constantly get stories, which is cool. You constantly get reports of paranormal activity because there's people there actually experiencing it 24/7.
Do you do a lot of ghost hunting there in that town?
We've taken the equipment around and done a lot of poking around down there. Unfortunately, with the buildings, it's hard to get in. The National Park Service isn't really open to that idea, and they own a lot of the buildings down there. So, that was frowned upon and shot down. But yeah, we've gone around the areas where you can access on foot and, the outdoor areas quite a bit.
That's kind of a surprise. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. We even did a ghost hunter experience tour a couple years ago, and I want to bring that back because it was pretty cool. It's pretty popular. We'd limit it to 10 people so that it wasn't a large crowd of people. You can got to get the experience, and everyone will get equipment, K2 meters, and we'd take spirit box and REM pods and everything, and go out there and stop at these different places, hear about the ghost story, and then see if we could get anything to show itself. And that it was pretty cool because we'd see some stuff, and I remember, like, around the Swan Tavern, where there's the ghost of a guy that was murdered that wanders around the tavern looking for people that killed him. The path where he walked, we're standing there, and it's tough because when you're doing this, we're not staging anything. So you go in there with the mindset as a tour guide, like, all right, and a paranormal investigator. I've gone on a lot of cases where nothing happens, and I know if not one of these things lights up, like, people are going to be disappointed. So I got to prepare them for that. I got to be like, this isn't on TV. This stuff is. We're not guaranteed to see anything or experience anything, but it was so cool because we have people holding the K2 meters, and they're kind of standing along the front path there, and we got the REM pod down, and the REM pod lights up, and then K2 meter after K2 meter goes off as if this guy was literally walking by, and I was shocked to see that.
That's cool.
It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. And then another area where we've got some activity was in that field where I mentioned where the house was, where the headless guy wandered around and the house was hit during that first attack. We put the REM pod down there, and it's quiet, and we'd spend some time there. I'd kind of gauge the guys and girls in the tour, and when they seemed to be all right, let's move to the next location, we would. But people were into it. We had the spirit box going. They're asking questions, but nothing's happening. And one guy says, hey, can I say something about the British? And I was like, hey, it's your show. Say what you want. So he said something about the British. I forget exactly what he said. But as soon as he said that REM pod lit up. And I was like, wow. Something didn't like that. Or at least it triggered the response. Either an agreement or opposition. I don't know. But so it's been cool seeing that, doing that, and kind of seeing firsthand. Is there anything there that's still going to give us any kind of readings or evidence?
No, that's incredible. That exactly what you're looking for is just something right after you ask for it. Did he say something negative or positive about the British?
Right. And with the people you have on the tour, if you get one thing, like, that's enough to keep them talking for the rest of the time. Like, oh, I can't believe that. Like I'll see one thing, and at this point, I'll be like, all right, I want to see more. I want to see something else. I want to see some secondary evidence, something else. But you know what I mean? Like you get one thing on those tours, people love it. And, it's cool to see. It's cool that it happens, but it doesn't always.
You need to start that back up.
Just perfectly quiet. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to start that one back up. I think people have a blast on that. And
absolutely.
I'm surprised. The USS Yorktown allows ghost tours on it. The North Carolina here in Wilmington or over in Wilmington allows ghost tours. There's a lot of these public parks that are allowing that, and yet yours isn't. And that's a shame.
Yeah. National Park Service, they don't care for that too much, I guess. Yeah. But the North Carolina actually spent the night on that ship down there. And that was a cool one. That was a cool place. And I wasn't expecting it. You know what I mean? Because at the time I was thinking like, okay, like a battleship doesn't seem like it would be too creepy, but people don't realize until you get on there and you get back in that section that's all rusty and looks like it hasn't been touched since like 1948. That's a creepy place.
Yeah.
And then I remember we were sitting there in the dark, and it was the part where it got torpedoed, and it was like they didn't renovate the bathrooms or anything. It was just like it's been left. It's not part that you would take on the normal tour. And we're sitting there in the dark, and we started getting a knocking response. And that was cool because you're sitting there, and the way it bangs on the metal, it kind of echoes. You know what I mean? It echoes. And I remember asking a couple questions, and we're like, how about if you want us to leave, could you give us a knock? And then it sure enough, in response to that, so we're like, all right, we're going to leave whoever's here alone, because it's not like we're trying to solve a case or help somebody here. Just let them be in peace,
Right. I've interviewed folks who've been on that, who have actually ghost hunted it, and they don't do tours. They strictly ghost hunt for scientific and whatever. But they've been on it 32 times now. And the evidence they have shown on the show here is amazing. So if folks want to go back on it, now you've heard from someone else who's been on there and got results. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we loved it. It was us and I think 2 other paranormal teams we all put in. And the ship was so big. The ship was so big that we could all go our separate ways and not even run into each other during the course of the night,
Yeah, no kidding. Hey, let's
that reminds me. Speaking of that, there was in the infirmary.
Yes.
We were running a spirit box in there, and this wasn't the commercial spirit box. This is one that Linda on our team had made, where you take the old the shack hacks, where you take the old radios and kind of manipulate them.
The SB-28
it came through with a bunch of names. Yeah. This and it was just an old Radio Shack. She soldered a wire in there and stuff like that, so it scanned through. But she came up with a list of names, and she's like, "Well, this is weird." And she went and lined them up, and they were last names of people that were on the roster for the ship.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'd never, that was some of the most solid stuff I'd ever seen right there.
Yeah. Actually, the team that goes on there had the same kind of an experience where they got names and was able to match them to photographs of men who had been served on that ship in the archives. So, man, you got something great. That's incredible.
That's awesome.
So let's move along. I do want to hit that bar, tavern, pub, public house, whatever you want to call it, that used to be that way. And I guess it's owned by the park department now, but it's haunted right across from the courthouse.
Right. That's the Swan Tavern. And that's the one where I mentioned, the travelers were constantly coming into Yorktown. It was a very, very busy town. And some of them would have a drink and be on their way. They'd always hit the tavern first. The Swan Tavern was like the main hangout. A lot of them would spend the night there. But one guy, he had come in, wealthy man, a wealthy traveler, and some of these characters that were up to no good saw him, and they decided they wanted to make a quick buck. So they waited for him out there in the stables, and when he comes out to get his horse, they rob him, murder him, and bury him in the shallow grave. That grave was found in 1933. So what happened with the tavern was when the courthouse exploded, the tavern exploded.
Okay.
Because the Yankee Army not only stored their gunpowder in the courthouse, but also in the tavern. So both buildings exploded, shook that whole end of town when this gunpowder was ignited, and this was 1863. So we just have foundations that are sitting there all the way up until the 1930s. National Park Service comes in, does some archaeological excavations, uncovers the original foundations, and they find this skeletal human remains buried in the shallow grave in the corner of the foundation of the stables. So this guy is the ghost that walks around that building, and they see him wearing colonial attire. He's wearing this long velvet cloak or long velvet cape, as some have described it, which is kind of an indicator that he had some money to be able to afford such a thing back then. But the tavern, one of the coolest pictures that we got was not from this guy. It was not related to him. It was related to this woman. And we don't know who this woman is. We don't know why she's there. I mean, with all the people that were coming and going, could be a number of unnamed people that we don't even know were there, you know. But right. This lady appears up in the upstairs window of the tavern. And there it is. This is one of the coolest pictures I'd seen of her. So this picture was taken during one of our tours. You can see what looks like that woman just standing up there, staring out the window.
Boy, she's so obvious looking through that pane.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see, like, she's wearing a nightgown. You can see her hair. This lady, what's interesting about it is we talked to a woman who worked down at the hotel in Yorktown there, and her brother was the deputy. So she was called in for jury duty back when the building across the street from the tavern was still a courthouse. And since her brother's the deputy, she's not sitting on that jury. So she's sitting outside and she's talking to the sheriff and the deputy, and it's daylight. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. And she looks across at the tavern and sees this woman just standing there staring down at her. Now, this picture, mind you, is taken at night during one of our tours, but she saw this woman in broad daylight with the naked eye. Her brother, the deputy, saw the woman. They go walking towards the top of the stairs, and the woman steps out of view of the window. They search the building. They don't find any trace of this woman. But from time to time, she shows up in pictures. And like I said, this is probably the best one I'd seen. But there are often pictures that are taken in that building, and there's anomalies with that window. And of course, we look to rule out any kind of matrixing or any kind of reflection from trees or anything like that could be in the window. I always tell people on the tours, and I know when we take the pictures, we'll always take 3 and take them from the same angle so that you can see, hey, there's something here in this picture and it's not in the other ones, you know, so you can see there's something that was actively there and had gone.
Race, would you put up that next one where you blew it up a little bit?
Yeah, so here, unfortunately, it gets a little grainier as we blew it up. But, I mean, that original one, you know, when you zoom in on it, of course, with nighttime and everything like that, is going to get grainy. But you can see her right up there by that on the right. If you go up the third pane up on the right, on our right, you can see her face, her hair.
You can even see... Looks like her eyes are white, like there's nothing behind them.
Yeah. You can see her eye. It looks like you can see her nose and her hairline coming down. So it's pretty cool. It's neat to get that validation, you know?
Yeah, thank you, Race. I wish you could get into that building. That would be just absolutely stunning to get in there.
That would be awesome. But yeah, unfortunately, they don't even give tours of that building. It's closed up and it just sits there.
There's one last story in it, because I don't want you to tell all the stories, of course, but there was a doctor's house that actually the spirits ran a woman out of it.
Yeah. So this house is known as the old medical shop. And there was a lady that had moved in there, and this was in the 80s. And she started having strange experiences throughout the house, hearing the thumps and bumps in the night, and it started getting increasingly worse. And it got to the point where it would be at its peak whenever she had a date. her keys would disappear. She'd find when she'd cancel her plans, the next morning the keys would be right there in the middle of the table. When she did hold on to her keys, the power would go out, so she couldn't see to get her makeup done and all that stuff. Well, one night she's trying to sit there in front of this dim light of this candle and fix herself up in front of the mirror, and she sees this guy step in the room behind her, and she turns around and the guy's gone. And so she gets up and runs to the door, and this flower vase comes flying across the room at her, breaks on the wall. And she calls a medium into the house, and the medium tells her that, hey, what you're dealing with here is an old barkeep. And this guy, this barkeep, he was in love with one of the women that worked in the tavern. So he apparently thinks that you are her. And one of the reports was that the medium went as far as to tell her that she was that woman reincarnated. Said, okay. You are that woman reincarnated, and you and he are destined to be lovers. So that's why he's acting up and he's causing you problems whenever you go out on a date. So, she tried to get him to leave. He wouldn't leave. He followed her to local establishments, followed her to friends' house, wreaked havoc at the friends' houses. And always, but she ended up moving, and she moved all the way up to New York, right? And what's crazy is that this is one of the ones I don't really say much on the tour. Sometimes I do if people ask or if we get into it. But when she moved all the way up to New York, this woman comes up to her and says, hey, this is going to sound a little crazy maybe, but I'm a medium, and you have a spirit that follows you around. His name is Robert. And this is the same name that the medium in Yorktown gave her for that guy, the barkeep. So the medium goes on to tell her, she says, you and he were lovers in 3 past lives going back to the time of Jesus Christ. So what's that lady going to make of that? I don't know, but it's crazy. It's crazy.
That kind of makes life hard on you.
Yeah. Can't get away from them. But, the house now, it's turned into some kind of a district office for a congressman or something like that. And it was a museum up until like COVID, and then it sat vacant for a while. And just in the past couple of months, the congressman or whatever, some politician moved in there. So, but I know as it was a museum, they were hearing some thumps and bumps and some things they couldn't explain. I heard from a couple people, but nothing that would definitely tie it to him or not. But
okay,
interesting that there was still some stuff going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jeff, I want to stop here because if I keep going, you keep going, you're going to give your whole tour. So we don't want that. But I can tell the folks there's a lot more in that town going on. And his tour covers a lot more. We didn't even touch the cemetery and the old church, and that's where the cool stories really start. So Jeff Santos, and he is are you the founder of Virginia Paranormal Investigations?
I am. Yes, sir. Yeah. I started the team in 2008, me and some guys that were in the Air Force. And now we started doing a lot of commercial stuff like the battleship and such, but now we do mostly residential, people's houses.
So VAPI, and what is the website for them, or do you have an email address for folks up there who may need your help?
Yeah, it's VAParanormal.com.
Okay. So VAParanormal.com, and for the ghost tours, it's YorktownGhostWalks.com. And how often are you holding them right now?
We offer them all week except for Sunday.
Okay. All right. Well, Jeff, thanks for coming back, and I appreciate your patience with our other issues. But, man, your stories are great, and I really like connecting them to the American history, especially such a pivotal point. Thanks for coming back, buddy.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You take care.
You too.
All right, friends, you heard it. Incredible stories, and there are a lot more. Wait till you get into that beautiful cemetery, the church stories, the graves. It's wild. So if you get a chance, if you're in the area of Yorktown, remember it's YorktownGhostWalks.com. Check out that tour. And by the way, Have you become an UNX subscriber yet? Because if you're not, you're missing everything here. I'm telling you. UNXnetwork.com. You get the magazines, which is going to become a monthly magazine after the 1st of July. So you'll get monthly magazines. You'll get the blog, the X blog. You get all the updates, all the things going on, and there is so much. The newsletter. You really need to be a member of this. And one of the things we will be talking about, friends, the 2023 XCon is coming. It's going to be held in the Kansas City area. And we've got 3 days of some of the most incredible people coming in. Friday night, Friday the 13th, a Bigfoot lady. She knows about the Bigfoot, especially in the Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas City area. I'll be speaking. And earlier in the day, Michelle, if I'm going to butcher this name, Ruiz, she's going to be talking not just about ghost hunting, but demonology. And that's, one of my favorite topics. Saturday, Debbie Ziegelmeyer, the head of Missouri Mutual UFO Network, MUFON. She's going to be talking about the 1973 Piedmont case. Bill Spicer is going to be showing you folks with your cameras how to get pictures of fast-moving UFOs. And, of course, there'll be a video about the haunting in Blue Hill, which it's wild. Sunday, and this is incredible, the Bradshaw Ranch. There's going to be someone there talking about that. It's kind of like the Skinwalker Ranch. There's so much paranormal activity going on there. And also Scott Wolter will be talking. I want to hear this one. Knights Templar and the alien connection. And if you're into conspiracy theories at all, you got to love the Knights Templar and the alien connection. And that's incredible. So join up on xnetwork.com and get your tickets for this. And folks, last year we did this because of COVID. We did all the XCon, our first, internet. Not live, but on the screen. And it was live. You just watched it from home. If you don't want to make the drive, if you don't want to deal with the hotels and the restaurants, which are doing much better, but still a little slow coming back from COVID, you can watch this from home for $80. You can $79. You can get a ticket to sit here and watch the whole weekend from the comfort of your own home. If you've got a big screen television, you can watch it right from your living room. There is so much going on. There was the whistleblowers, the UFO whistleblowers are coming out, constant news on them. There was that Vegas alien case. There's been a Mothman, for lack of a better word, a humanoid, red glowing eyes, human face, wings, seen in the Illinois, Missouri area. So there's so much going on. If you're not an UNX subscriber, you're missing out. And I also just want to say one more quick thing. On Friday nights, you got to catch Phenomenon Radio. That's Race Hobbs. And he has got the best of the UFO field, talking about a variety of UFO cases. Again, UNX Network's where you need to be. So I will leave it there for now. Happy 4th of July. And I want all of you guys stay safe and stay spooked. Good night.